Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Can you recall a time in your life when everything changed drastically? Or maybe you're dealing with something in your life right now, or a decision you need to make that you know will change your life drastically. For me, that happened when I was 17 years old and living in a country that doesn't exist anymore, the Soviet Union. It was the Soviet Union, yes, USSR. It was the end of summer of 1987. And I was eager to start my last and third year of college, studying to be a choreographer. I left school at 15. It was 1 year after Gorbachev came into power and launched Perestroika, and 3 years before the Berlin Wall came down. You know how you remember the moment when you hear shocking news perfectly? Like when Princess Diana died, or when 9/11 happened, for example. Well, I remember the moment very well. I was in my friend's house copying some music because she was the only lucky one in the whole neighborhood to have a boombox with 2 cassette players. I don't know if you remember those, but she had it, yes. And I was there copying some music, and while it was copying, we were catching up on our summers, and I was telling her how I ran away from a Ukrainian village where I was sent to teach some dance, part of Soviet education system. When suddenly we got interrupted by a knock on the door. It was my mother, and she said I had to go home immediately. Now that never happened before, so I was very apprehensive to hear what she had to say. As soon as we got into the elevator, she announced that we were granted the visa to Israel and we were leaving as soon as possible. Now, this is what you need to understand. It took 9 years for my parents to get this visa. They applied many times, they got rejected many times, and every time they applied, they were both fired from their jobs and were looked upon as the enemies of the state. And that's exactly what it meant. In a highly patriotic and closed country as the USSR, asking to leave meant you were a traitor. It also meant that at the time of departure, you would be stripped of your citizenship, all your possessions, and would not be allowed to come back. So for me, at the age of 17, the life as I knew it was over. And not because I wanted to, I was actually quite happy living there. But my parents wanted a better life for me and my younger brother, so I had no choice but to face the reality. And the reality meant that I had to say goodbye to all my friends forever. I did not know the Berlin Wall was going to come down. I had to say goodbye to my extended family forever. I couldn't even stay in touch with them because that would get them in trouble with the KGB, and we didn't want that. So from one moment to the next, I became a Jewish refugee, going into the unknown, leaving everything I knew and loved behind. We were given 9 months to get our stuff together and leave. About 5 weeks later, on the 6th of September, I found myself standing on the train platform with my parents, my younger brother, and my grandfather, who was quite sick, so we're taking him with us. And we're waiting for the train to take us to Moscow. From Moscow, we would fly to Vienna, the first stop of the immigration process. After that, the refugees were sent to Rome, and from there, whichever country accepted them, that's where they would go. It is on that train platform that it finally dawned upon me the whole gravity of the situation, because for the first time in my life, I saw my usually very tough and strong dad break down and cry because he was saying goodbye to his childhood friend. I still get emotional remembering that. The next 48 hours were a bit of a blur, spent in fear and hiding. I remember sleeping on the floor of some tiny apartment in Moscow. I can't remember how we got to the airport. I couldn't even enjoy flying for the first time ever. I do remember when we landed in Vienna. It was a small plane with only about 10 families of refugees. And for some reason, we landed away from the common terminal. There were no people there, except for the driver that came to pick us up. He took us through an empty corridor, put us on a minibus, and took us to some remote apartment in the second district of Vienna, if you know Vienna. All 10 families lived in one apartment, shared one kitchen and 2 little bathrooms, but nobody complained. Now let me go back for one moment because something, I think you would find this interesting. When we were still at the airport, going through the deserted corridor, we saw a stand with brochures. Now imagine, this is the first thing a group of immigrants that just arrived to a foreign country see, a stand with brochures. So everybody got curious about it. And somebody wanted to find out how much it cost. So as the driver, he said it was free. So we all went and got a whole bunch of brochures. I actually think we got all of them, just because they were free. It's just to show you the mindset. A few more things that I think would be fun to share that were a culture shock for me. I remember standing for hours and hours, watching the people passing by the fruit and vegetable stalls that nobody was looking after them, like they were outside of the stores. And nobody was taking anything. Nobody took an apple or a pear. I find it so surprising that nobody just took something, they just passed by. Another thing that I found different and not so exciting is the abundance of choices. Now, we tend to look at choices in the Western world as something positive, something good. But for somebody who's used to no choices, or 2, maybe 3, when my mom sent me to the supermarket for the first time to get some jam, and I saw dozens of jars on the shelves, I was so frustrated and angry, thinking like, why does it need so much jam? And I had no idea how to pick one. It took me hours. Another thing that was a culture shock is the abundance of sex shops and posters with naked people, and generally this whole freedom of sexual expression. In the Soviet Union, that was all a taboo. I mean, maximum what we saw in movies, maybe some kissing, maybe some breasts late at night, I don't know, but that's all. So that was really a shock. There was a sex shop right next to the apartment where we were staying, and a friend of mine, she was the same age as me, 17. For weeks, we were standing outside, gathering our courage to go and see what's in that store. She was braver than me, so she practically dragged me one day there. And about 5 seconds later, I ran out looking like a beetroot. On another hand, seeing my father's and my 13-year-old brother's faces when we ended up at the topless beach, it was priceless. So about 3 months later, on the 3rd of December, we arrived to Miami, Florida, with a little suitcase each, filled with kitchen appliances and bedding. Now, I don't know, I should actually ask my mom, why she thought that outside of the Soviet Union, they will not be selling kitchen appliances and bedding. But in her opinion, to take care of her family, she needed kitchen appliances and bedding. And that's what we brought. $80 per person. Nobody spoke English, and the only people we knew there were my aunt and her daughter. Now, America was not as bad as we were brainwashed to believe during the Cold War propaganda. But for me, it felt like an exile. The mindset was so different to what I was used to that I felt completely lost, confused. I lost my sense of identity. I didn't know what I wanted to do, who I was anymore. I got quite depressed. At first, all I wanted to do was stay in bed and cry into my pillow. And that's exactly what I did for a few weeks, until I realized that my parents had a tough job getting on their feet themselves and looking after my younger brother and after my grandfather that was getting more and more sick. So I had to pull myself together and find a way to support myself, and I had to learn to survive. So for the next 10 years, I looked after myself. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs at a time while studying full-time. Just to give you an example, the jobs that I did, while I was still learning English, I worked in audiovisual department. I worked in the mail room as a cocktail waitress. I worked as extra in movies, as a live mannequin. I promoted some products in supermarkets during the day, in nightclubs during night. I was a dance teacher. I was a babysitter. I remember scraping some labels in the cold basement of University of Miami and later promoted to the president's office to scan files, which I was really happy about. I also worked as a teacher assistant for handicapped people, among many other things. Eventually, I graduated with highest honors from Florida Atlantic University, majoring in education. I was supporting myself, and on the outside, I was doing well. But inside, I was still feeling just as lost and confused. I wanted to be somebody. I wanted to change the world, but I had no idea how. Then one day, I attended a seminar with different speakers, amazing speakers. There were Anthony Robbins, Brian Tracy, George W. Bush Sr., Pat Riley, very inspiring people. And after I attended that seminar, I started swallowing up books and tapes on self-development, and I learned a lot. Everything that I learned has brought me to where I am today. And one of the most important things that I learned was that I am responsible for my life, nobody else. That the quality of my life has nothing to do with where I come from. It has nothing to do with how I was brought up, how much money I had or didn't have, what education I got or didn't get. The quality of my life depends on what I choose to believe and what habits I choose to have or not to have. The quality of my life also depends on the decisions that I make and the consequences of those decisions. And the quality of those decisions depend on the quality of what I'm choosing to feel and to think on a regular basis. And when I found out that it's actually choice, what I feel and what I think, I spent a lot of time researching and learning about how to master my emotions and how to filter my thoughts. And then I wrote a book about it, which you can later purchase if you want. I also learned that holding on to blame, resentment, piling responsibility on my childhood traumas or on those who wronged me was only holding me back. So I had to learn to forgive and to accept. I found out that guilt is one of the most destructive emotions, and I learned to let go of it. I also learned to let go of feeling sorry for myself and the victim mentality. But most importantly, I learned not to be scared of change and to face my fears. It is by identifying and facing our fears that we really get to grow and we really get to create the quality of life that we want to have. And today, I'm living the life I couldn't even imagine that I would be living as this little last Jewish immigrant. I live in a paradise called Marbella. Most of us do. I give birth and I'm raising 3 incredible children here. I do what I love and the rewards for that are amazing. I feel in control of my time. I have very supportive and wonderful friends. I am in love and I'm loved. I still dance because dancing is my passion. And I believe in doing things we're passionate about now and not postpone them for when the time is right. I'm passionate about many things, and I share my passion through writing and through speaking. I have 2 best-selling books. I have thousands of people whose life I touched and influenced. It's an incredible feeling to know that you bring value into this world. But this can never happen until you learn to value yourself and your life first. So let me ask you something. Would you say you value yourself enough to let go of the emotions that don't serve you anymore, that only cause you suffering and pain? Or are you choosing to hold on to them because it's become a habit, or because the familiar is less scary than the unknown? Do you value yourself enough to overcome the fear of change? Without change, there is stagnation, and stagnation means death. There is a big difference between the water that flows and a swamp. Would you say you value yourself enough to dream big, to go after those dreams, and to make choices, no matter how terrifying they might seem at the moment, that give you a chance at living a much more fulfilling, more peaceful, and a happier life. Because as long as you're dreaming, you're alive. And as long as you're alive, you may as well live this life to the fullest and on your terms. Thank you.